Hey, it's Matt, your average gamer, and for this one, we're going to be going over the 5 best arcane builds, the 5 best arcane weapons in Elden Ring, and I'm going to do them in order. So the 5th one will be the worst of the 5, even though they're all good, and the first one obviously will be the best, and we're going to start here with number 5, the Rivers of Blood. Rivers of Blood was number 1 on this list at launch, no question about it. It was probably one of the most powerful weapons ever, but since then it's been nerfed, I believe, 2 or 3 times, and it kind of went back into that range where it's just good now and it's not super overpowered. Fortunately, the Rivers of Blood treatment of the nerfs, the way it went about it was it ended up giving a little bit of a damage boost, I think, to the fire part of it and whatnot, but generally speaking, the bleed went significantly down on the weapon art, which is probably the most spammable part of the weapon, and one of the most spammable ashes in the entire game of Elden Ring. We all remember launch and everything associated with that in the Rivers of Blood PvP-wise. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of people out there that weren't exactly a fan of the launch PvP Rivers of Blood. But with that being said, it's still quite a good weapon on 1.09.1. It's number 5 here. It can proc bleed and it does a little bit of fire damage too. All the footage, by the way, is from New Game Plus 7. If you're wondering why I'm doing the 5 best arcane weapons, I frequently still get a lot of comments on my channel about what the best ones are or which ones they should be using in terms of the Somber ones, so I wanted to make a list for it to make life a little bit easier, and then I decided to rank them as well. Let's get into equipment for this build. Equipment, we have the Rivers of Blood plus 10, any seal will do. We have the white mask on, and we did hit 51 poise. We have the Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Melissen's Prosthesis, Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia. Then we have the Faith tier and the Thorny tier for those successive attack build-up. A lot here that you can build up for successive attacks and just get more damage out of the Rivers of Blood in general. Let's get into stats. It's going to be similar to the Reduvia build. Spoilers, by the way, this is going to be later in this video. I do think that's one of the better ones. I really do like the Reduvia. And as far as this goes, you're going to split between Dexterity and Arcane. Arcane, pretty much, you get a good cap around 45. And then Dexterity, I went for 45 as well. And next up here, a weapon here that, unlike the Rivers of Blood that was nerfed, it was actually buffed, and that is Morgott's Cursed Sword, which can be a really powerful weapon. It works well against large targets, by the way, even though he's incredibly slash resistant and a little bit bleed resistant. It has a really good widespread with the fire damage, and then you get the bleed build up as well. Definitely get a lot of damage out of Morgott's Cursed Sword, and it is a really fun weapon to use. I've mentioned this in previous videos, but it's one of the most aesthetically pleasing weapons in terms of how it looks, and then the amount of damage you can get from it is quite good as well, because you can boost the fire damage on it, and the bleed build-up's not too bad either. It's kind of secondary to the amount of damage you'll get, but the weapon art overall, very, very solid, and as you can see, it can poise break as well. Definitely something that you're going to enjoy using if you're an Arcane and Dex user, and by the way, as far as Arcane and Dex go, this build, the Reduvia build, and the Rivers of Blood build, you can all do with similar stats. You can have a similar stat build up for all 3 and then try out all different 3 ones and you'll have good success with them because they're all similar in terms of scaling. And by the way, as far as the simpler enemies, I'm on New Game Plus 7, so they all do a lot of damage, but I recommend using Morgott's Cursed Sword first on some of the easier enemies in the game because directionally it can be a little bit challenging to get used to the weapon art, but once you get used to the weapon art, you can aim it well and whatnot. It does have a high damage cap and potential. It's a really solid weapon. Let's get into equipment. Equipment, we have Morgott's Cursed Sword plus 10 preferably, any seal will do. We have a random set on, Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Fire Scorpion Charm, and then we have the Fire tier along with the Faith tier so that we can do our buffs. Let's get into stats. This is the same stats I did on the Rivers of Blood build, and this is going to be the same ones as far as the Reduvia. The other 2 builds in this video are different. I do want to mention, by the way, the video at the beginning, I forgot to mention this, for the Rivers of Blood, it was plus 8. It was meant to be plus 10. I had a plus 8 and a plus 10 Rivers of Blood for some reason, and I had the wrong one equipped, and it still did a lot of damage. But anyway, Morgott's Cursed Sword, very good. Next up on here is a personal favorite, and that is Reduvia and Bloodblade. Very powerful weapon. Number 3 for Somber Arcane Weapons for me is definitely the Reduvia, and we had Morgott's Cursed Sword at number 4 and Rivers of Blood at number 5. And the reason Reduvia is right here in the middle at number 3 is it doesn't quite beat the next 2. They're both very, very powerful weapons. However, it does allow you to use bleed from a distance, and then when you get close to enemies and you mix in Blood Blade with the actual contact of the weapon, you can get a ton of bleed buildup with the Reduvia. New game +7 Mog isn't going to matter that much after we use the shackle a second time because he is weak to bleed. And again, I'm going to go up to him as close as I can get here and try to get the contact with the weapon to show you guys here. But when you make contact with both the weapon and blood blade itself, it seems to do around like 150 bleed or so. It's a crazy amount of damage and it can chew through boss HP. As we finish beating up Mog here, and obviously he's going to take a lot of damage, he is weak to bleed. I just want to mention real quick, if you're not on the Discord, definitely be sure to join the Discord. You're not going to want to miss out. There's over 500 people in there now. And if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to sub to this channel. I've been doing nonstop Elden Ring content. It's been an absolute blast lately, and I'm going to continue to make content. It's been really fun. I have a greater community than I could have ever really imagined at this point, so it's been really quite amazing how you guys have been. It's been awesome. Let's get into equipment. Equipment, we have 2 of the Reduvias, preferably +10. Any seal will do. You're going to want the white mask for this one. Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Sword's Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, and then I had the Thorny tier along with the Faith tier. Let's get into stats. Once again, Dexterity and Arcane, but I want to mention something very important about the Reduvia, why my setup is slightly different. It's because if you're going to go for the successive attacks, you can do like 2 Occult Daggers and get as much, maybe even more damage. So for Reduvia, I concentrated with the Ritual Swords, Talisman, and the Shard for Blood Blade and get that range bleed. Next up here is Marais Executioner's Sword, one of the best weapons in the game. Incredibly powerful arcane weapon. This is number 2 on my list. After we had number 3 was Reduvia, number 4 was Morgott's Cursed Sword, and number 5 was Rivers of Blood. We are up to number 2 with only 1 more to go, and this is Marais Executioner's Sword, a very fun weapon to use, and it can destroy bosses fairly quickly with its successive attack build up and power. You're not going to struggle much when you're using Marais Executioner. You will have to get used to the fact that it is chargeable, so it takes a little bit of time to cast or use the Ash of War, however you want to say it, but it doesn't matter. The amount of damage trade-off is well worth it, and it can destroy bosses fairly easily, and it's very buffable too. You can buff the damage up and even one-shot many of the bosses in the game with Marais Executioner Sword. It's that good. Let's get into equipment. Equipment, we have Marais Executioner Sword +10. Any seal will do. It didn't matter for the white mask. This isn't a bleed build. We had the Godfrey icon because it is chargeable. Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Melissen's Prosthesis, and then you're going to want the Thorny tier because this does build up successive attack power, and then the Faith tier as well. Let's get into stats for this one. Stats, by the way, as far as stats go for this build, it's a little bit different. It's a strength and arcane build. I believe I got both to 45, and we were still able to hit 51 poise. This is an incredibly powerful build. If you're looking for something to take down the majority of bosses, Marais Executioner Sword will never let you down. That's number 2. And next up is number 1 on this list, and the most powerful arcane somber weapon, in my opinion, in the entire game, Mohgwyn Sacred Spear. Mohgwyn Sacred Spear is incredibly powerful in the sense that not only does it do bleed, but it also does fire damage, and you can get it from a little bit of a distance too. And it does leave you as a standing target, but it's not going to matter much because whatever boss you're facing, as long as they're able to bleed and you're able to get fire damage on them, which is a lot of the bosses in the game. This could even destroy Radagon, by the way, because his fire resistance is low. It can just absolutely destroy everything. It is so incredibly ridiculous, and it's one of the most absurd weapons in the entire game. If you haven't used Mohgwyn Sacred Spear yet, definitely pick this up. You're going to see what it does to Radahn here on New Game +7. It's never really a challenge to use this. Once you get used to placement, you're going to absolutely shred through HP. That was like one really long run-on sentence, but at the same time, there's nothing you could say about this weapon that doesn't make it incredibly broken until the day comes where it's going to get nerfed, and I don't think it will get nerfed. I'm hoping it doesn't. It's still going to be one of the best, and in my opinion, the best arcane-based somber weapon in the entire game, able to absolutely eliminate bosses, kind of make their HP bar essentially disappear. By the third one, it's going to proc bleed 2-3 times while doing immense fire damage. Trust me, it's not that hard to use once you get used to using it, and I'll show you my setup for this, how to absolutely destroy bosses with this. It is very, very easy to get used to. Radahn thought he was going to get away there, kind of hilarious, but he did not get away. At the end of the day, he went down fairly quickly, like everyone does to Mohgwyn Sacred Spear. Let's get into equipment. Equipment, we have Mohgwyn Sacred Spear +10 preferably. Any seal will do. We had a random set on. I should have had the white mask for this build, but I forgot it when I was doing the clip. Ritual Swords Talisman, Shard of Alexander, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Fire Scorpion Charm for the fire damage part, and then we have the Fire tier and the Faith tier so we can do our buffs as well. Let's get into stats. For stats, this is a strength and arcane weapon, but unlike Marais where it was split, I went for 30 and 60 because the weapon art seems to draw more from arcane and I want to get more bleed. And even though you get that cap around 45 arcane, the weapon art seems to get a lot of its damage from that. So I want to make the most out of it, get the most damage out of that weapon art, and absolutely destroy things. Speaking of destroying things, by the way, a lot of people asked me to do the Larval Tear video, so I wanted to throw this clip in because I needed Larval Tears throughout this video. This is the one that's in Kaled. I'll show it on the map where it is, but I'm going to leave it in the description below in a lot of my videos. It has all 18 Larval Tears in that video, all time-stamped for your convenience to find each individual one, and so that you can make as many builds as you want to. I go through these like crazy. I know a lot of you guys too end up going through all of them like I do, or at least most of them, so that video is going to be really helpful. Definitely be sure to check that out in the description if you need to know where those are, and again, I time-stamped all of them for your convenience to make life a little bit easier. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and hopefully you can find an incredibly strong build on here that can help you run through the game or make the game a little bit easier, or just have fun with some of these builds. If you're not on the Discord, definitely be sure to join the Discord. There's over 500 people in there now. You're not going to want to miss out. And if you're not subbed and you love overpowered PvE builds, be sure to check out all the awesome builds that are on my channel. Thanks for watching, and as always, I will catch you guys there.